Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here this evening, or whatever time it is, from wherever you're dialing in from, because we are absolutely thrilled to have alumni and guests joining us, not only from across Australia, but across the whole world, with guests joining us from Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, the UK, Germany, Belgium, and many more places. Before I start the event tonight, I would like to acknowledge the Bidjigal people, but the traditional custodians of the land on which UNSW Sydney is situated. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. My name is Dr. Stephanie Ward. I'm a senior research fellow at the Centre for Healthy Brain Aging at UNSW. I'm interested in interventions that promote healthy aging, including intergenerational practice. I'm also a consultant geriatrician at Prince of Wales Hospital next door. Tonight, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by two people that I very much admire, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Suraj Samtani and Professor Leon Flicker to discuss the wellness of aging. Firstly, Dr. Samtani is a fellow CHeBA research fellow, a postdoctoral fellow at the Centre for Healthy Brain Aging at UNSW. His research aims to investigate the effectiveness of a novel, co-designed social cognition intervention for people with cognitive impairments. Thank you so much for joining us, Suraj. Professor Leon Flicker is the inaugural Professor of Geriatric Medicine at the University of Western Australia and a consultant geriatrician at Royal Perth Hospital. And I can tell you, as a geriatrician, Leon's like Mick Jagger for us. He's very famous. And when I was a trainee, he was described to me as a genius, and that's borne out, and you will see that tonight. Leon established the Western Australian Centre for Health and Aging, and led the development and organisation of undergraduate and postgraduate education in geriatric medicine in Western Australia. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Leon. So throughout the evening, please, if you have questions, post your questions for the panel in the Q&A. And feel free to vote on your favourite questions, because this will push them up to the top of the list. We're going to start the night with some pre-submitted questions, and then we're going to move on to our audience questions. And we will do our best to get through them all. So the first questions I'm going to pose, and I'm going to start with you, Leon. The first question I have is, why are people living longer in Australia, and are they living healthier?
Well, the first thing is that people are definitely living longer in Australia, and they have been doing so since 1900. And we've been doing it about 1 or 2 days extra per week of life almost. So about 1 to 2 years of life has been added for every decade since 1900. Now, this has actually slowed down in the last 3 or 4 years, but still we're living longer. And as far as we can tell, and the data aren't particularly good in this, but as far as we can tell, those extra years are more healthy than unhealthy. So we're getting extra healthy years defined by people being independent and able to still engage with the community and other things. So we are living longer and we're living healthier. Now, the more important question, which I guess you raise, is why? And that's been very difficult to tease out. But it seems like there's been a lot of things that have been happening over that period of time, and probably each of those things have had a relatively small contribution, but there have been a lot of good things happening. So in the early years, we had the avoidance of the major public health germs, things like measles, polio, all those things were eliminated fairly early. And then we seem to be going through a plateau in the 60s, but then we kicked on again with longer lifespans and healthier lifespans. And that probably had a bit to do with the control of high blood pressure, probably to do with avoidance of risk factors, a lot of occ health stuff where people didn't get injured in workplaces, so didn't necessarily get run over as much as they used to. So we've had a lot of things, the relatively small contributions, giving us a better time and a better health for most of us.
Well, it's good news overall.
It's excellent news.
And Leon, I'll ask you a second question. What emerging trends or breakthroughs do you foresee that could significantly impact the quality of life for older adults in the coming years? I'll ask you first, and then I'll ask you, Suraj, what you think.
Well, I think that a lot of the things that have happened and are happening are better control of the common diseases. And a lot of that has been with relatively subtle changes. So we're getting better treatments of cancers, which means people are living longer and healthier with cancer and often eliminating those cancers. We are having better treatment and control of heart disease and stroke. Again, little changes as along the way. One of the things that we are getting better at all the time is musculoskeletal disorders, although that is now a very common problem causing disability in late life. And some of the other problems we're not getting quite as good control on are the mental health issues, and particularly dementia, delirium, depression, and also, of course, anxiety. So a lot of these issues are still to come forward, but those are the common issues of older people, and we are getting mostly some improvements in all of them.
Suraj, what are your thoughts about whether Australians are living longer, healthier lives, why that is happening, and what trends or breakthroughs do you see that could impact the quality of life for older people?
Unlike Leon, I'm not a medical professional, but from what he's saying here, people are living longer lives, and I see people nowadays who are a lot more health conscious, who are trying to, smoke less than previous generations, drink less than previous generations. They're actively exercising more. They'll go for annual checkups to their doctor, or be told to go by other people and follow that advice. So I think what I'm seeing is people more aware of these public health campaigns and trying to actively live longer, healthier lives. And even with mental health, I see people making more of an effort. Of course, we're quite lucky in Australia to have 10 Medicare sessions where you get a rebate. You get a mental health care plan from your GP, and you can see a psychologist for 10 sessions and get a rebate for that. So that's also been a great thing in Australia. To answer the second part of your question, Stephanie, I think the breakthroughs that I see here are that people are willing to form new communities these days, and I find that really exciting because I see people, taking inspiration from your show. For example, I'll say people go, oh, I want to volunteer in, an aged care or assisted living sort of setting, or they want to set up an online community. I saw during COVID, a lot of people join online choirs, and that lifted everyone's spirit through that power of music. So I think there's something there. New technologies are allowing us to connect with more people than ever before.
And it's really interesting that some of these breakthroughs, they're in the medical science area. We've talked about new medications, antibiotics earlier on, then medications for cancer, cardiovascular risk control. And now we're looking at this new frontier of looking for disease modifying therapies for other really tricky conditions in older age, such as dementia, delirium, some of those musculoskeletal issues that you mentioned, Leon, especially around frailty and wasting of muscles all that weakness in muscles you get with older age, sarcopenia. So lots of exciting changes happening there. But it's also really interesting that some of the new emerging trends are in a way quite ancient and simple, aren't they? They're around embracing opportunities to just be with other people, to develop community, to sing, to connect and have a good time with one another. And you mentioned, Suraj, that using technology is something that's helping to bring this back together. Do you think that it's because our society's changed in a way that it's making those simple things around connection more difficult these days? Do you think, Suraj?
Well, I think you get groups of people, some people who find that technology is a way to really stay connected with friends and family who might be in other places around the world. And I've seen, especially during the lockdowns, a lot of people just embrace, going on to video calls with their friends and family, and they've become a lot more comfortable with that, and now it's just become a normal part of life. But I think there are still some people who feel a little bit nervous about using those technologies. But I was walking past my local library the other day, and I saw they had these classes for older adults to come in and learn how to use the computers there and get onto the different websites and create their profiles. So I love that local councils are putting up things like this for people to go to.
Leon, with all of the new changes, particularly around clinical care, do you think that they're all good, or do you think that some are not so good? And what would you recommend that we do at any age proactively to get better outcomes as we get older?
So one of the problems that as we grow older, we have increased frailty. So that becomes a problem that people not only have one problem, but they have multiple issues that decreases their reserve in multiple systems and makes them more prone to both the side effects as well as the benefits of any treatment. And one of the issues we've had is that a lot of treatments that have tried and shown to work have been shown to work in people with just one problem. And then when people have multiple problems, you get more side effects than you'd expect, and they actually end up causing harm. So those are big issues, and we're still in the process of trying to work out how we can better judge frailty in individuals and how we can adjust the treatments so that it reflects that. But I'm actually quite cheered by the fact that we've made such good progress over the last decade. And I think that we're doing a lot better than we used to. So I think that this is not an insurmountable problem. I also think that a lot of the neglected issues have been in musculoskeletal disorders and the mental health issues. And a lot of the problems there lend themselves to non-pharmacological strategies, not big interventions necessarily, but appropriate physiotherapy and exercise, looking at lifestyles. And so, again, I'm reasonably optimistic that those problems are something that we will eventually learn to live with, and actually will adjust our lives so that we have healthier old age.
Make a really good point. Musculoskeletal problems, when we can't get up and walk and move around, and it causes distress and pain, it's really life limiting, isn't it? Whether that's within your home or being able to access your community. And physical exercise can be so beneficial, and it's something I do and recommend. Not my saying, but I love this saying that it's not too late to start and it's not too early to start for us to be thinking about getting.
The thing that's changed in recent years has been the chronic disabling conditions are taking more lives away from people than the things that kill you. So that's been changing. And so we really have to pay special attention to the things that make you miserable and take parts of your life away, as well as the things that kill you. So that's an important discussion that's taking place. And I see Suraj nodding his head because, you know, when we're talking about the mental health aspects, that's really important.
Completely. Suraj, what would you recommend that we do to proactively change our lifestyles to have better aging outcomes, especially around mental health as we get older?
I think the answer here is really quite simple and something anyone can do. What we did, we actually just finished a study where we looked at what kinds of things people needed to feel happier as they were aging. And we found that even after controlling for all of the health factors, like whether they were exercising, smoking, drinking, had diabetes, all of that, the one thing that really made a difference for people's mental health was whether they had someone to talk to when they felt stressed. So like you were saying, Stephanie, is just ancient things, simple things that are just common sense, but it's finding those people. And sometimes we need to make new connections. And what I love about, you know, getting older is that we get actually very good at choosing positive connections. As we age, that's our superpower. We actually get rid of the negative ones and hold on to the really positive ones.
So we can become a little bit more skilled with those relationships. But I was reflecting as you were talking just then, and often we have to save financially for our futures and invest to care for ourselves financially as we get older. We need to take care of our physical health. But I'm really taking from you that we actually need to spend time and effort and energy investing in relationships that will endure and give us all of those other benefits as we get older. But that's something that all of us of any age needs to hear and take on board. I think that's a really great message. I've got one more question for you, Suraj, at the moment. Research suggests that social connections are important, as you mentioned. For older people in today's world, how can we enhance opportunities for older people to connect, in your opinion?
I think we need an approach that goes through many levels. So we need to design communities that have public spaces, community spaces for people to come together, green spaces like parks with trees where people can go and walk with other people, community halls where they can come together for cultural events or sport events, music events. One thing that we found after looking at all the interventions out there was that people tended to really make strong connections when they went to exercise classes together with other people, or when they went to music classes or dance classes with other people. They tended to hang around and have chats with other people and make new friends. So if there's something like that that you can do, that's amazing. You're going to make really good new connections. And I think it's really important to remember that, you know, often when people retire, they feel like they've lost something from their life. So it's really important to remember to also think about how you can give back to the community at that point in time. That's another way to stay connected with others.
Volunteering and looking for opportunities to mentor others, for example. But you make an important point that there needs to be often some type of structure or purpose to people getting together. Just expecting it to happen maybe isn't enough. We often take our work and all of our professional engagements for granted, don't we? Because it provides a structure and a social connection network. And when we move into the retirement years, you have to really seek out those opportunities and invest time in it. Yeah. Leon, do you have any other thoughts about how we can enhance social connectedness amongst older people?
Well, I'd have firstly a couple of cautionary points. A lot of older people lose that social connectedness because they become sick with lots of problems. So there's bi-directional relationships, that people who become sick lose their social relationships, and that then feeds on to other problems. And the other thing about growing old, which is important, is that you lose your social relationships because the other person becomes sick or dies. So that, not surprisingly, as you grow older, the chances of somebody in your social network dying becomes much higher. So that's why it's important to be able to establish new relationships at any age. And that's very difficult, particularly when your cohort, you have survived your cohort. So that's a skill that's more difficult, because you're not talking about people from your generation, you're talking about people from different generations. The other thing is that I've done some work here with colleagues, and it's certainly not the size of that social network that's important. It's the perception of the individual, whether that network is enough. Okay. And people's expectations of what a network provides, a social network provides, are very different. And so size doesn't count. It's all about whether you are getting the relationships you need at that stage of your life. So I think we have some, just a few complicating factors when we're talking about the importance of social networks and how it affects people's lives.
You make some excellent observations, and they mirror my own from my clinical practice as well. And I guess I'd add to this conversation that I've had the real privilege of being involved in some intergenerational practice programs that were filmed and aired as part of a ABC series called Old People's Home for 4-year-olds, and then Old People's Home for teenagers. So intergenerational practice is something that I think has great potential. It refers to the purposeful bringing together of different age groups with the aim of benefiting both age groups. And I guess my reflections from being involved in those programs, and then some others in the community, is that it's really quite special when you get yourself reflected back from a different generation. You sometimes see things in yourself you hadn't. And what's also amazing is that capacity of friendships and connections to develop between different age groups as well. You can often get something very different out of that relationship than you do from connecting with someone of your own age. And it's been a privilege for me to be part of that. I'm obviously a big advocate for the structure that these programs can provide for social connection. And of course, it can be a bonding, exercise groups are a bonding experience. And if you've got a group of people that are also, dealing with the chaos and spontaneity of young children, that's a bonding experience for the older people involved as well. But it's also just shown me that friendships and connections are important no matter how old you are. You're never too old to have fun. So I'm going to go on to some other questions that have come across for some pre-submitted questions. So first of all, Howard from Brussels in Belgium has asked, the mental process of coming to terms with realizing you're getting old as you look in the mirror, different physical changes in ability, the denial of aging, as mentally I still think I'm young, but the evidence is contrary to this. And the fight against reality takes a lot of rethinking and energy. How do you age graciously and realistically without resentment and denial? What do you think, Suraj?
Well, as a clinical psychologist, I see a lot of people who struggle with this question. And I think, if we are worried about our appearance or our physical ability, we got to look beyond ourselves sometimes and see our shared humanity with other people and see, look, there are other people experiencing these changes with their body, with their appearance, with their ability level, and we're really not alone in that. And that gives us this feeling of being part of humanity in general, rather than feeling so isolated and lonely. And I think it's also really important for us to think about what are the qualities that we love about ourselves beyond those things? Is it something, in your personality? Is it your kindness? Is it your sense of humor? Are you just really good at making dad jokes? I mean, whatever your superpower is, embrace that and, be true to yourself.
What do you think, Leon? What's your recommendation about how we can age graciously and realistically without resentment and denial?
Well, firstly, your image of yourself doesn't change very much as you age. All the literature does show that. So you actually think of yourself in much the same way, but you'll obviously notice that some things don't work quite as well as they used to. So that's the first thing. The second thing to point out is that humans are incredibly adaptive. So virtually any of the things that happen to you, you will adapt to. With time, you will adapt to it, and you'll adapt to a loss of function in some way, and you'll continue to have a life. And whether you want that to be a positive life is very much up to the individual. One of the really important things, and probably more so for men traditionally, is this meaning attached with your life. And a lot of men in particular have attached work as their meaning of their life with very little outside of it. And one of the things that's very clear is that the people who have the flourishing old age still have a meaningful attachment to their lives. And the meaningful attachment may start as you grow older. It may start in a volunteer position. It may start in continuing some work and mentoring people from your previous work. It can take all sorts of forms. But the important thing is meaningful engagement. The Japanese have this idea of ikigai, which is the idea that there's a lifelong meaningful work that everyone must do. No matter how old or how disabled you become, you must have meaningful work to continue. And whether you call it work or not, it's the meaningful engagement with society that's important.
Very wise and very true. Takes a lot of effort though, doesn't it? I mean, I'm taking from this that at every step of the way, as we get older, we need to be making an active effort to ensure that we've got these opportunities for meaning and we've got these opportunities for engagement. Is it always up to the individual, or do you think, Leon, that maybe our society also needs to support these opportunities for older people to have these
obviously it's a societal issue. Yeah. You don't do this in isolation. And one of the issues that we have is that we can choose to work as a community or to go as an individual. And if we choose to go via the individual approach, it becomes up to the individual to pursue this, or we can go with societal approaches and we can look at ways of encouraging that sort of group towards meaningful engagement. And there's lots of things that we choose: retirement policy, how much you're allowed to work when you're on the pension. There are lots of little things that we do along the way. How walkable is our neighbourhood? Do older people feel safe on the footpath? Is the footpath so cracked and disrepair that we can't even walk outside the door? So there's lots of things we choose along the way.
Yes, really good thoughts. I've got here from Richard in Sydney, Australia, has asked, age invariably means we cease working. This often results in a total loss of identity, of meaning, and of reason to carry on. I planned for my retirement after 70. I knew I was losing my edge by undertaking a postgraduate certificate and then a master's degree. However, this nearly postponed the inevitable. Having devoted my life to work, I have few friends, no interests, hate golf, and merely read the news during the day. Apart from normal platitudes, how does a professional plan for 20 years of nothing?
And it's 20 years of the best part of your life. flourishing. He should be planning for flourishing rather than nothing. I mean, the problems the challenges we strike in old age are largely medically driven. The social challenges that we're describing are something that can be dealt with. So if you've done 2 degrees, there are at least another 1,000 to do. I mean, there are lots, and if you are doing a degree, what's the rest of your class doing at the same time as you are? I mean, there's so many avenues to pursue, even in that short question.
Yeah. Okay, Suraj, any other advice from you?
Well, I'll come back to what we were talking about, meaningful activities and purpose, because I think we get happiness from different sources. So some people say there's 3 types of happiness. There's that happiness you feel when you achieve something like completing your degree. There's a happiness that you feel when you're doing something you enjoy, like eating chocolate or something like that, going on vacation. But there's a 3rd type of happiness, which I think your question is about, which is that lack of purpose and identity that you're feeling. And I think about what you care about. What are your values as a person? How can you give back to the community? Because if there's some way that you can volunteer and give back to the community, even if it's once a week, I think you'll find that hole that you're feeling, that void you're feeling, will fill and will lift you up to a new height that you didn't know existed before.
Some good advice, very thoughtful. I've got one more question that was pre-submitted, and it's Touch from Cambodia, and he's asked, oh, this is a nice one. Can interactive sport positively contribute to the wellness of aging? What do you think, Suraj?
I think absolutely it can. We know that group physical activities, group exercise is great for you. It's good for your mental health. It's great for your social connections, and it's great for your physical health, of course, because you're getting out there and you're exercising. But you find that you make new friends, you maybe start hanging out with them afterwards, and you're using different parts of your brain as you're thinking about strategy, you're thinking about communication, and you're just having fun. That's going to lift your spirits too.
Anything to add, Leon?
I used to say that sport is wasted on the young because all the benefits of physical activity and social interaction are much more important as you grow older. So but when I started to think about the 90-year-old AFL team, I realised there might be some issues with taking a mark in the air and being bumped at the same time. So there are obviously health issues where your body may not be quite as resilient as it was in younger age, but the benefits of the physical activity and the interactions are probably greater as you grow older. And one of the things that's been argued probably correctly is that that many of the so-called aging phenomena are probably due to the marked decrease in physical activity that people in their 30s and 40s undergo, usually because they're not doing as an active things as they used to. So that's probably related to what we assume is aging is actually due to decreased physical activity and other activities.
I think it goes back to that saying I mentioned before, it's never too early to start investing more in your physical health, in being more active and spending time doing that, because it will pay off over time. So we need to be engaging in activity, physical activity. We need to be planning for when we're not working, and we need to be investing in relationships. Bit of hard work, huh? But I often say anything that's worth doing is often hard work, and it pays off. I'm going to throw now to some of the audience questions. And the first question I've got a very popular question here from Dennis O'Hara. What do we see as panelists as the most promising current research in the area of gerontology? Most promising current research in the area of gerontology. Well, I might start off by answering this one. I guess there's been a lot of interest in improving the diagnosis of dementias and different subtypes of dementias using biomarkers, and also in terms of looking at treatments that might be able to actually treat underlying pathological causes of dementia, which is a very common condition as we get older, highly prevalent, affects many people, and many of us in this room may have had experience with dementia either as caregivers or personally, or as family members. It's a clinical syndrome. It has a number of underlying pathological causes. To date, we've not had any treatments that might alter that course. There have been a couple of new medications that have had some impact on clinical outcomes. I think there's a lot more work to be done in this space, but I think that there are some scope for some positive changes in this area in the future, which will be of benefit, noting that it's a very complex condition with multiple underlying causes. Leon, what do you see as the most promising current research in gerontology?
Well, I actually have quite a different view about the dementia. I think that the current treatments, if they actually do work, and there's still discussion whether they actually work at all, but if they do work, their effect is going to be so minor to be almost insignificant. I think the biggest place and changes with dementia has been the prevention, where we now know that 40%, up to 40% of dementia is preventable, and by simple lifestyle factors. And I think we're still only halfway with that. I mean, we're still talking about the importance of hearing, of eyesight. We're talking about the issues associated with physical activity associated with dementia. The effect of improving physical activity seems to be much greater than any of the new drugs. I mean, we are in the world where we are starting to realize how important the total picture is rather than the individual treatments in that area. I think one of the other things that's really important when we start talking about the most promising avenues in gerontology is that we are talking about 1,000 flowers being planted and seeing what blooms. There are so many exciting areas in gerontology, and that would include the medical aspects, the biological aspects, the social aspects, the psychological aspects, and the community aspects. There are so many exciting things that are happening. It's very hard to pick just a few. And I think that we are just in the process of having a bit of totality about where the evidence is going. So I'm reasonably optimistic.
Fantastic. And Suraj, what about you? What do you see as some of the more promising current research areas in gerontology?
I think, Stephanie, that the rise of technology is really one of the things I'm most excited about. We talk about digital biomarkers being the new blood biomarkers. It's, we're seeing apps being able to track people's heart rate, blood pressure, physical activity, social interaction. Maybe we can get to a point where we identify drop-offs or changes in these quite early, because we know that the trajectory for dementia starts about 20 to 30 years before the rise of symptoms that are noticeable. So I think we will get to a point in the next decade or two where we will have apps that are holistic, that track your health and let you know, to keep on track with your self-care, like physical activity, interacting with other people, and hopefully prevent not just dementia, but all sorts of other conditions associated with aging.
That's a great thought. I've got one of those apps, and I've also realized that my phone just knows everything, right? You mentioned something and an ad comes up a bit later, and I started to think, well, our phones are knowing how we behave. Could they be giving us those early signals that we're behaving in a different way, or we're not managing things as well as an early signal that we are starting to develop some cognitive decline? I think that the abilities of AI and monitoring systems. We're a little bit fearful of them at times, but maybe they can safeguard us in a way. I've got so I think there is a lot of exciting things happening in the space of gerontology, and I think that the panel's given a broad overview. But Leon, I really like what you said, that there's a field of 1,000 flowers in this area. But some of the advice, again, it's just simple stuff: exercising, eating well, control of blood pressure as well, possibly the most effective prevention for dementia as we're in our midlife. That we've known about for years, benefits everything else, but it often comes back to these simple principles. And thinking of really simple and intrinsic principles leads me to my next question from Kathy Rayleigh. Do we think that the quality of our food and diet, the amount of sugar consumed, pesticides in the food chain, are having an impact on our health and on our longevity? What do you think, Leon?
So this is a complicated question. One of the things that people have pursued in recent years has been the idea of dietary patterns. So we used to have this belief that it was specific micronutrients that were important. And now we realize that food comes as a package. People pursue a dietary pattern, and that then determines the food, the micronutrients and so on are involved in complex interactions with each other. So, I did a little bit of work here in collaboration with the Melbourne Collaborative Cohort Study. And one of the things there was that study was very well designed to look at the effect of Mediterranean diet on healthy longevity, on mental health in later years. And the Mediterranean diet seemed to have some benefits, which a lot of people have shown. But one of the really interesting thing was the typical Australian dietary pattern also had benefits. And the typical Australian dietary pattern, which again is changing, but it used to be meat and 3 veggies, right? With fruit salad and ice cream for dessert. That was the typical Australian dietary pattern for many, many years. And when you looked at that pattern, that also had benefits.
Right.
Almost the same as the Mediterranean diet. And the pattern of diet that had the worst outcomes was the processed food diet. And now we call that the ultra processed food diet. And that's a diet with a lot of sugar and salt, foods that have been processed within an inch of their lives, almost unrecognizable in their original form. And that food is not healthy. And that's, as a society, we need to be trying to discourage that sort of food. And we should be trying to look at as unprocessed food to do the cooking ourselves as much as possible. And we need to somehow do that. The other thing that's really important in this area is that people pursue these dietary patterns based on socioeconomic status. So in the early part of the 20th century, the large end of the 19th century, poor people were skinny and rich people were overweight. By the end of the 20th century, poor people were obese and rich people were skinny. So the world changed in that 100 years. And what had happened then is that the socioeconomic status had determined people's dietary patterns. And often these ultra-processed foods are relatively cheap, and therefore they're available to people with limited means. And so we're seeing the exact opposite: sugary diets, lots of salt, having people with socioeconomic status. Is this important? And the answer is yes, because a lot of what's happening in longevity right now, there's a stalling of longevity it's stalled completely in the US. It is stalling in the UK, and where our increase in longevity is slowing down. And a lot of this is due to the social determinants of health. And the social determinants of health are wide-ranging issues. It is the idea that increased inequality affects a large part of the population and causes a lot of increased risk factors for some groups and much less effect on others. So we see some people living longer than they ever have, but some people going backwards. And this is the problems that when you start talking about dietary factors, you start talking about socioeconomic status, you start talking about whether people live alone, whether they're eating with other people. So there's lots of other issues involved.
Complex. But let's try and keep our food as wholesome as possible. Can't go too wrong. I've got a question I'm going to direct to you first, Suraj. How can people who are children of aging parents support their parents in a healthy aging journey? This is a tricky one that come across a lot.
Well, it's a very complex process because you go through many stages, or maybe you're at the early stage of finding out what your parents have, what sort of chronic or health conditions they have, and try and learn how to manage that. But then it's really important that, to help other people, you're able to first look after yourself. The thing that I see the most as a psychologist is people burning out because they're not looking after themselves. Often people say, look, I should be looking after my parent 24/7, or I should be there, like, on this day at this time, and if I'm not feeling well, or if I need some time for myself, I can't really give that to myself. So I think, we're no good to other people if we can't look after ourselves. You at 80% is better than you at 30%. So it's really important to keep your battery charged. And when you're dealing with other people and they're going through changes, remember that people are not going to be the same. People are going to change over time, and learning to be patient and accepting, and also allowing people to have their own sense of independence and choice is really important, and not taking their voice from them, not speaking for them. For example, if you're taking them to a doctor, let them do the talking, let them make the decisions as much as possible. Remember that you're just there to be a support person as much as possible, because people want to still feel like they should be able to do all the things that they can do. So support them.
And sometimes they'll want to do things that we don't want them to do, or they won't want to do things that we would like. But to a large degree, we have to accept that as children of older parents, and put more emphasis into the things that really, really matter. That's often what I find, and I really love your advice, which I think is so important, that if you are in that process of caring for older people, to make sure you're looking after yourself as well. The opportunity and the act of caring for another human being is magnificent, and one of the most beautiful things any of us can do, but also often one of the most difficult. Leon, I imagine in your clinical role in particular, you're often counselling families around this issue. What advice do you give?
Well, I agree with both of you. I totally agree with Suraj's approach. But the other thing, I'd just make a couple of extra points. The first thing is that you're a family first and you're a carer second. And often it's really important to get all the members of the family together and work and be on the same page. And often families carry a little bit of baggage over the years, and you want to try and resolve that a bit before you embark on a new process and so on. So that's often very helpful, to actually think of yourselves as a family first, trying to get everybody together and trying to get on the same page is where you're going. And the other thing that I would suggest for a lot of people is that you get good advice. Often the things that you're dealing with are quite complicated. If people have dementia, that's a complicated issue. And if you haven't met it before, you need to get some advice and help along the way, and you shouldn't be worried about seeking that. And it comes in lots of forms. And there are lots of medical issues that people develop as they grow older, and you really need to get the best quality advice on that and to share that with the family if you can.
Yeah, excellent suggestions. Leon, can I ask you the next question? Can you comment on whether working longer or retiring later helps to promote mental health? And are we retiring too early, even as we live longer lives? That's from K. Kentan.
So clearly there are people who have a lot of value in their work and therefore want to continue, and that's probably a good thing. And there are other people who hate their job and can't get out of it soon enough. And so that's the two extremes, and and you obviously see different people. There are other jobs which are very, very difficult to do as you grow older, just on physically demanding jobs. And so those jobs become more and more difficult as you grow older. And so maybe retirement is, is not a option that you can have much choice over. The important thing, as we discussed earlier, is to have a meaningful engagement or job that you do after retirement. So retirement is, you may decrease your hours or you may give up what you've traditionally been doing, but you still have to have a meaningful job or attachment in your later life. And it's probably not looking at so much a suddenly stopping your job and that's it. What you're actually looking at is a transition from one period of your life to the next. It doesn't have to be abrupt, and you can choose which bits you want to go into. And often people are able to decrease their hours and choose the bits that they want to do because financially it's not so important anymore.
Can I ask you, do you think, what period in our lives, what age should we start to be thinking about this, about making those plans for transition?
I think people say you should do this in your 20s when you first start work, and that's obviously unrealistic because people just don't do it, right? They just don't do it. So let's talk about, but people in their 50s and 60s, this is what they're having to think about.
Yeah.
And they're thinking about the transition period and what they're going to be doing after this transition period.
Yeah.
And it will be different for everybody. The other thing that is, one of the things that people worry about is the uncertainty, because there is no single path for everybody.
Yeah.
You have to choose your choices along the way. And some people financially won't be able to choose quite as many choices, but still there will be some choices to be made.
Yes. Yes. And I guess there might be the situations where people haven't planned at all and work stops and things can fall off the rails. Do we have evidence that shows that planning makes a difference to how you...
No. Very hard to do randomized trials in this area.
Yeah. I've got a comment here from Yvette Stanton, which is a great perspective. Not everybody gets the opportunity to age. Shouldn't we start to promote aging as a privilege? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would also say that when we talk about an aging population, isn't that a bit of a success story as well at a public health level? Life is precious, and we shouldn't see these as difficulties. These are privileges. So thanks for reframing a lot of the discussion of it. And I've got to and I'll just also ask you, going back to you, Suraj, around the working. Do you think that working or retiring later promotes mental health as we get older?
I think, going back to what Leon said, it does for some people. If you use your work as a way of staying socially connected to other people,
Yeah.
keep your brain active, then definitely helps you to stay engaged with the world around you, gives you a sense of purpose and a sense of connection. But I think equally it's important that you start to put into place other things, and you start to think ahead about other things that you could be involved in, so that when that time comes, you've already made a new network. You've already thought about what is going to give you that purpose and joy. And I think our expectations are sometimes really not aligned with what the story is. And we know that happiness in life follows a J-shaped curve, and that actually the happiest years of our lives are in later life. It's in 60s, 70s, 80s that we feel that sense of really being true to ourselves, giving back to the world around us. And, it's sort of like when you're younger, you think about love as a concept for, just yourself, and maybe there's just yourself and your partner, your children, or your siblings. And then as you get older, you realize that it's much bigger than that, and that's where the true joy is.
Yes, so really wise words. Now I've probably just got time for one more question, and I've got a question here, and it's a clinical question, so I'm going to shoot it to you, Leon. And it's a common one, I have to say. My mum's been tested for dementia, but she's been given the all clear. But she's regularly telling the same story within 24 hours to the same person. She doesn't remember what she did when prompted. What other tests are available? This is not an uncommon situation, is it, Leon?
So there are lots of tests available, and mostly the tests that are most useful are pen and paper tests, because they're the ones that help sort out whether there is a problem and how severe the problem is. Now, some of those tests are fairly crude, and they may be normal in people's earliest stages of developing a dementia. There are more extensive tests which can be offered to some people, but one of the important issues is that the person with the memory problem has to want to have it investigated. And when you look at a population in Australia, so if you look at the population in Australia, the mean age of onset of symptoms is about 82 years of age. So it's quite old. People don't realise quite how old it is. And about sizable numbers of people will only get assessed when they actually require aged care services. About a third of people will only do that. So you've got a lot of people who are resistant to testing and don't want to pursue the diagnosis early on. And that's, I think, the commonest issue. And one of the things is that there is more testing available, and often those simple pen and paper tests are the most sensitive early on in the condition. Right now, the biomarkers aren't that useful in this stage of the condition because, for example, the amyloid biomarkers are positive in 30 to 40% of normal people over the age of 70. So they're not useful in this stage. They're not specific enough. But we do know that simple testing is very, very useful, very helpful, and you can do more intensive testing, and that often requires specialists, and it may require neuropsychologists, for example, or other specific health professionals.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you said. So do you know what? We are just about out of time. Before we wrap up, I actually just wanted to read a comment that's been made from one of our participants tonight, Marco Masselloni, and he's wanted to share that he's noticed that in Italy, the people who age better are those who smile more. So that's really lovely to hear, and I think that we can take something from that as well. And I've certainly learned a lot tonight and smiled a lot. It's been a real honor to be discussing with you both, Suraj and Leon, and I've got some lessons to embed into my own day-to-day life as well. So I'd like to thank everybody who's made the time to be here and to participate, ask great questions. It's a topic that the three of us are very passionate about, and I think many of you in the audience are as well. Thank you for your really great and thoughtful questions. Sorry we couldn't get through all of them. The alumni team are going to be in touch in the coming days, and they'll ask you to complete a short survey. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and let the team know if you've got some suggestions for other events in the future. I'm going to wish everybody a good evening or good morning wherever you are, and all the best.